Thanks to AdvaMed for setting this up. Thanks to Congress for sending out my wife's first Social Security check. It'll help. My goal today with AdvaMed is to make contacts. So hopefully there's 1 or 2 or 5 or 6 staffers in this room that are going to hear about the blood community and what we do and get interested, because we have a lot of advocacy issues that we need to engage you about, and this is the best way, I think, to meet you. I'm going to provide some context about the blood community to help you understand the environment that we operate in and what are the barriers that we see to the adoption of some of this incredible technology that my colleagues will tell you about. So, the blood community, I left the hospitals off there because they're not really very important. It's really about blood collection facilities. As long as we do our job, everything's wonderful. So the blood community is 99.99% not-for-profit in this country. This is not an accident of history. The impact. The volunteer blood supply is the impact of the recognition very early on in the 50s and 60s of the consequences of paid versus volunteer donors in the setting of unprocessed whole blood and blood components. So ABC, the company that I work for now after having retired after 30 years doing other things, is 67 of these independent, community-governed, not-for-profit 501c3s. And our 67 members are responsible for just over 50% of the blood supply. The 46 more percent is the American Red Cross, and their 36 blood regions under, it's a single company, under one FDA license, but as are our members, they're not-for-profit and based entirely on volunteer blood donors. And I want to describe to you some real challenges that are, as we speak, impacting our ability to leverage the advanced technologies that Dr. Bracey, Joanne, and Dr. Banerjee will tell you something about. This is whole blood collections in the U.S., and you can see it's from, I don't know, 99 on. And I just want you to focus on the last 3 years. This is our core product, whole blood that we turn in components, particularly red cells. And you can see a steady decline, and in 2014, that line is straight or descending actually faster. So that the core product that we depend upon for revenue over expense as we collect, process, and send this blood to the hospitals, use is declining, and it's for a number of reasons that I'll describe to you. But the important thing is our core product is less used now than it was historically. This is the U.S. in red in comparison to the rest of the world, okay? Green is Canada. Canadian Blood Services, English-speaking Canada, and Hema-Quebec, our member in Canada in Quebec. This is how many red cells are distributed per 1,000 population. Pretty simple stuff. And what you can see here, it would be nicer if I had a laser, but I don't think it works. Let's see. Oh, yeah. Whoops. Well, I apologize. I'm technically challenged. Okay, so here we are this is 2009, 50 red cells distributed to the hospitals per 1,000 population, and Canada down around 30. Are people sicker in the United States? Arguably, we have larger knife and gun clubs in some of our cities, but the answer is probably no. That we were using too many red blood cells in 2009 and before. And we know this not just from graphs like this, but from large, beautifully done, randomized controlled trials that demonstrate to us fairly clearly that the way we have traditionally transfused in the United States doesn't necessarily make people any sicker, but it probably doesn't add value at the levels that we transfuse. So as we look at that evidence, we're starting to transfuse less. That's good. That's evidence-based medicine. If you're not doing any good, you ought not to take chance of doing harm. So there are, at the margins, a group of patients that we have traditionally transfused in the U.S. that we'll probably do well. In fact, we know we'll do well without transfusion. And we're recognizing that, and that's the biggest explanation for the decline that I showed you on the last, that we've finally started to take to heart and disseminate the information, the trial data that informs the way we transfuse blood in the United States. Okay, this is price. This is a survey that we do every year at ABC, and this is the core product here in blue, leukoreduced red cells. And anybody who has interest, we'll define those things when we sit in your office and talk about it. This is our core product, and as you can see, use is going down and price is flat. And in a sort of a market for red blood cells, that's a bad thing. We're not getting more money. Our infrastructure isn't going away, yet we can't raise our prices. And the reason for that is manifold, and I think I'll touch on a little bit. Well, let me do that. So the hospitals get paid their DRG, okay? And then the hospital pays us for the processing and distribution and testing and all those things that we do for blood. So every 3 or 4 years, CMS updates the market basket to reflect the cost of blood, but it never reflects our real cost, okay? So our margins keep eroding with a flat pricing scheme and decreased utilization. That's really the market trap that we're in now. This is cost effectiveness analysis, and this is actually a summary that I've taken out of a very recent publication in our core journal, Transfusion. And I just want you to look here at, so when we test for HIV with our old tests from the mid-'80s to early '90s, testing the blood saves money in the healthcare system by preventing transmission of infections from transfusion. Some of the newer stuff, however, PCR, molecular testing of blood donors, in fact, costs us somewhere in the range of $2 to $5 million per quality adjusted life year. We would normally think that something is cost effective if it costs somewhere in the range of less than or equal to 3 times per capita GNP. So in the US, that's $155,000, $160,000 would be cost effective. And we do a lot of things in blood banking that go way beyond that. So there's a question that needs to be asked here. Is there something about blood that demands that? And if so, how are you going to pay for it? If it's well beyond what we're willing to pay for other things, tell us why we should pay for it. And if we should, and that's a decision that we can't make in the blood community, that's a much broader group of stakeholders to answer that question, it has to be funded. So where are we? Declining use of our core products. So we have shed excess capacity, which in the worst case scenario means we also shed, for example, disaster capacity. We're diversifying. We're trying to do things besides blood, but that's not within reach of the bulk of centers. Those are research activities, clinical trial activities that are not yet mature and very capital intensive. So not much help at this point with the declining use of our core product. Price pressure from the hospitals is relentless. We have leaned our operations, cut jobs, dropped services that are less than critical, undergone mergers and acquisitions. So ABC 5 years ago had 77 members. We're down to 67 members now. And that's not because anybody's gone away. It's because there have been mergers and acquisitions, fewer companies, fewer local jobs, all the things that happen during consolidation of mature industries, which is what we are. And then there are regulatory issues. Extensive licensure requirements with long approval cycles, and that makes the vendors cautious about what they'll bring to the U.S. market, okay? So in Europe, they have 20+ infectious disease markers, infectious disease tests, and in the U.S., we have essentially 2 companies. We have Ortho Clinical Diagnostics and Abbott making our serologic standard assays that we've used since the 1960s and 70s for infectious disease detection. We have 2 vendors in our market versus many, many more in Europe. The FDA has prohibited, as they move through a regulatory cycle, from talking about cost, and CMS really doesn't look at the cost or the value of blood when they adjust the market basket. We're such a small piece of the health care pie, I think we get lost, and we need to talk to you guys about that. And hospitals are unsympathetic to our problems. Isn't that true, Dr. Bracey? They're not sympathetic. It's what have we done for you lately? We want that red cell cheaper, and we don't care what you're dealing with from a regulatory standpoint. And then the last point I want to make is there's a discussion that has to happen across healthcare in this country as we move towards what I think is a zero-sum game in healthcare. How much safety are you willing to pay for? Where do you want to put your resources? You want to get the last case of hepatitis transmitted by transfusion, or, for example, do you want to make sure that every kid in the country has access to immunization? If we're approaching a zero-sum game, which many of us think we are, we have to decide what our priorities are. And I think that's the last thing. I wanted to really depress you about the environment that we're living in. I hope I've done so. And now you'll hear about some very neat technologies that, if we can figure out how to finance, will perhaps even revolutionize the way we do business in the blood community. Thanks.
Dr. Katz, thank you.